Hello, I'm Geon-bok Lee. Recently, interest in vibe coding has been growing significantly. There are opinions that an era of non-developers is coming, and conversely, that developers now need to know even more. To find out exactly what this is, what's happening in the space, and how big tech views vibe coding, we're joined by a lead from Microsoft to hear his insights.
Welcome.
Nice to meet you.
It's been a while since we had you on our channel.
You haven't been inviting me.
Looking back, we discussed AI-driven coding exactly a year ago. We titled it Mouth Coding. And it seems to have become much more of a reality in just that 1 year.
A year ago, I talked about mouth coding and said an era of easy coding was upon us. This just shows that our broadcast and channel were looking a full year ahead.
So what we discussed today might be us detecting changes that will happen another year from now.
This might turn into a broadcast predicting what will happen in 2026.
We'll go ahead and book you for June 2026 then. The term vibe coding itself has been around for less than half a year, right? I think I first saw it early this year, and the debate around it seems to be very heated lately. I'm curious whether this is a skill that developers must learn, or if it's something they don't necessarily need to know, much like the no-code or low-code trends that suggested you could develop without deep knowledge of programming languages.
I think it's a bit different from low-code and no-code.
Those were features for creating applications in a business context without extensive coding, so their target audience was clear. What we call vibe coding today means it's become possible to code and even build applications literally just by speaking or through simple chat, using only prompts. Naturally, there are bound to be different perspectives on this. You can make it appear as if someone with no knowledge of code is building something. For some simple programs, the output might actually work, leading one to think, I can create a professional program without knowing how to code. But that's likely the limit. While a non-developer could achieve more by studying and learning various functions, I believe coding remains a domain primarily led by programmers. A non-developer might be able to create simple programs, games, or use well-known proven code snippets with vibe coding alone. However, when it comes to implementing more specialized functions, I don't think it's possible with just vibe coding and no programming knowledge. I think that's still quite difficult at this stage. For developers, it's less about learning it and more about needing to get accustomed to the new pattern of coding with AI rather than coding alone.
So we have the term vibe coding, but some people also call it AI coding. How should we view the relationship between the two? Is vibe coding a broader concept, or is AI coding the bigger umbrella term?
We can break it down into 3 stages. The first stage is a human getting a little help from AI, for example, AI responding to simple prompts. This was the most common form in the early days. The current stage is where a human asks and the AI answers. We work with AI in a quanda format, asking things like, how do I do this? Or how do I build that? Looking ahead, vibe coding goes a step beyond that to a stage of co-coding with AI. You delegate some parts to the AI and do some parts yourself. This is where a distinction begins to form between what you can do and what the AI can do. It's helpful to think about it in these separate stages.
Is it about delegating tasks you could already do, or are you also handing off things you can't do at all?
It's less about can't do and more that for someone just learning to program, the proportion of tasks they can't do would be larger. They might think, wow, I couldn't do this, but the AI can. But from the perspective of an experienced developer, say with over 10 years of experience, they can delegate routine coding tasks they know how to do but don't perform often, or tasks with very predictable patterns, to the AI.
So when I first heard about vibe coding, I thought it was a concept intended for non-developers.
But based on what you just said, the target audience is different, and it can be difficult for them. Because of their limited understanding of coding, they might not even know how to instruct the AI to build and deploy an entire system.
It can be both. As I mentioned before, if you ask it to create a simple program, it will. It would be fully functional, and some features could even be customized. You could say, change this part to be like this. However, to ultimately judge whether the AI did a good job, you need to be able to read the code. Without the ability to accurately read code, even making proper corrections can be difficult. If you need to create a ball bouncing inside a 3D box and you want to change the ball's size dynamically, you need to know where to find the code that modifies the circle's radius. If you just vaguely say, I don't know, just make it smaller, the AI might misunderstand, take a long time to produce the intended result, or get it wrong. But if you can read the code, you can say, this is simple, I just need to modify this part myself. A smooth coding workflow means you can go directly into the code and make the changes you want. Relying solely on AI without any knowledge of code should probably be called something other than coding.
People often use that expression, right? That what non-developers create with vibe coding are essentially toy projects. So can we say that for actual developers, they approach vibe coding from the perspective of co-coding with AI?
Exactly. And as you mentioned, there's the development itself, but there's also the overall process aspect. For instance, the typical software lifecycle includes design, development, testing, and deployment. Right now, AI can even handle the design phase. If you say, I want to build this, it can outline the necessary tasks, generate the code for each task, and even run the program. That's the current stage. But there are many more steps involved. For example, once you've built something, you have to package it. Then you have to upload that package to a store. To let others use it, you need to distribute it, or maybe build a website so people can access it. There are many complex steps. Of course, AI can potentially automate those steps as well. That's why vibe coding is less about making things easier and more about how a developer's scope of work can be significantly expanded. While it might seem like it's getting easier on a different level, or that it's targeting beginners or non-coders like low-code/no-code, I see it more as the domain of what a single person can accomplish has expanded.
When we talk to developers, we often hear terms like back-end and front-end. Is this related to that? Can everyone become a full-stack developer now?
That also requires foundational knowledge. Being full stack isn't just about being able to do front-end, back-end, and middleware. It's called full stack because it implies a deep understanding of the entire platform. For example, we used to call someone a polyglot developer, a fantastic developer if they knew 5 or more programming languages. But today's AI can handle far more than 5.
Doesn't it know pretty much all of them?
Yes, exactly. It can switch between C++, Python, C#, and Java. In that sense, AI might seem like a top-tier programmer, but code isn't created with language skill alone. From a user's perspective, you can certainly use AI in every domain. However, the person using it must still possess the corresponding knowledge. It's like having a highly capable assistant to help you with your work.
It seems like the competency gap could widen significantly depending on whether a person uses this technology or not.
That also depends on how you define competency. For instance, you could say someone is more competent because they produced more code, but it could also be that the quality of the code improved. In that case, was the quality improvement solely due to the AI? While the AI played a part from an experienced developer's standpoint, the crucial factor that improved product quality was having more time to focus on the core logic they wanted to write. And who secured that extra time? The AI did.
The impact of vibe coding must also vary greatly depending on the organization the developer belongs to. The current narrative often focuses on a solo developer who can now handle everything from planning to deployment. People say AI coding is incredibly powerful, but in reality, someone within a large organization might have used AI's influence just to simplify code. The applications seem very different.
That aspect will likely change a lot depending on organizational culture, division of labor, and structure at each company. However, one thing is certain, whether you call it AI-based vibe coding or something else, the scope of what one person can cover has undeniably expanded. It provides the capability for a single person to handle everything from design to development, testing, deployment, and even beyond. Therefore, we shouldn't view this merely as a tool for increasing productivity or a developer's focus. Those are obvious benefits, but I believe we need to see the bigger picture.
By bigger picture, you mean from an organizational perspective, right?
Yes. The concept of platform engineering has been around for quite some time. Platform engineering is about developers automatically allocating the resources they need to develop their applications. For example, even if I write the code for a web application myself, I still have to rely heavily on other teams for things like the server it will run on, firewall configurations, and various deployment mechanisms. That's a completely different problem. With platform engineering, developers can provision their own servers, code, and deploy directly, which shortens development time and speeds up maintenance. This is because the process of requesting and waiting is eliminated. Now, if you add AI to automate these tasks, I believe the entire development process as we know it could be transformed.
So, in the past, you'd ask the server operations team for a server, and once it was ready, you'd deploy your code. In many cases, build, deployment, monitoring, and reporting were all handled by different people. Was platform engineering the next step after that?
Right. And the step after that is the expansion with AI integrated into it.
Correct. When that happens, it's not just about developer convenience, it means the scope of what a developer can cover expands. And with that expansion, all these other possibilities open up. So given this, we have to ask, how will our development organizations evolve? And what will be the structure of our development teams? Ultimately, the time it takes to deliver these functions will be significantly shortened.
You mentioned how organizations might evolve as one person's scope becomes wider and faster, but many people in the industry seem to be worried. I'm also curious about how big tech companies view vibe coding. Are they looking at it purely from a positive perspective of how can our organization improve? Or is there also discussion about the potential for replacement, which is what many people fear?
As a case in point, Thomas Domke, the CEO of GitHub, is going around the world talking about this like an evangelist. But what he meant in his LinkedIn post wasn't that you don't need to learn coding anymore. Thomas himself said that people still need to learn to code and that human intervention is necessary. I think that's a very important point. You still need to learn coding. Humans must be involved. And there are definitely tasks that require a human. It's just that the scope of what humans do will expand. The focus should be on how effectively the development process can be improved based on this foundation, not the common misconception that you don't need to learn to code anymore and anyone can do it without human involvement. I think that's an overinterpretation.
So you're saying the idea that you don't need to code or you can code without knowing how is a bit of an exaggeration?
Of course, it's possible for toy projects or simple programs, but that's looking at a very narrow slice. When you consider the overall system or the developer ecosystem, it's a very small part. So there is still a vast area of work that needs to be done by people.
That makes me think that AI coding or vibe coding is becoming an essential competency that developers need to have.
But I see this less as a single competency and more as a current or a flow. So for someone who insists on sticking to their existing domain, saying, I'm only going to do this, the question isn't about simply adding one more skill. It's less about having to learn something new and more about the decision of, will I use this as a powerful tool to expand my own scope or not? Existing developers shouldn't think, I'm not going to use that. Instead, they should think, wow, if I use this, I can achieve even more. It's not just about applying it to your daily tasks, but seeing it as a tool to ask, can I use this to broaden my horizons? That's the right approach. The mindset of, I'm a coder, so I'm only going to focus on the code. That's a very siloed perspective. Right now, we often treat design, coding, and testing as completely separate stages. But that's changing. Now it's possible to view them as a single integrated process, so long as you understand both the code and the business requirements. In the past, these were tasks you didn't necessarily have to do yourself, including testing. Of course, developers do unit testing, but if you expand this scope, I believe an era is coming where organizations will demand one person to handle multiple roles.
If that happens, what becomes of the person who used to provide servers on request back in the pre-platform engineering days? What is their new role?
In fact, that role has already been largely redefined. It's no longer about saying, I only do this one thing. Instead, crossover tasks are becoming common. Operations staff are getting more actively involved in some development tasks. And developers are participating in parts of deployment and operations. A significant amount of organizational change and role redefinition is happening. The scope is defined by how a company defines a role, not by a global manual or standard that dictates this is how it must be done.
Because work scope differs by company and team, do you mean it changes based on how it's defined at the team, organization, or company level?
If an organization manages a huge number of applications,
For instance, deploying and managing hundreds of them, there could still be a dedicated person for that. That person might even be the one using AI to automate the process. But in a small company, it's natural that one person might do everything. I expect it to manifest in various patterns, but regardless, a crossover domain will definitely emerge thanks to AI technology.
So even if the total company headcount or size remains the same, the internal silos will be significantly rearranged. Some walls will fall and new ones might be built. As you meet with people across the Asia-Pacific region, is there a general atmosphere of encouraging AI coding?
It's an obvious direction, but the benefits of using AI are more starkly visible in coding or programming. You achieve tangible results more so than with other AI tools. Granted, from the point of view of upper management, the pace might seem a little slow.
When you say slow, do you mean the adoption rate is slow?
No, I mean the speed at which results materialize, because you've spent money on an AI agent. You pay a certain amount per developer, so you wonder when the return will come and if things have really improved. The developers will say, it's so much better, but that might not be what management wants to hear. They might be looking for metrics like productivity, and that takes a certain amount of time to show. That's something that can take a little time. It's hard to expect that if you spend money this month, you'll see the returns next month. Of course, the users will find it convenient, but they also need some time to adapt. All things considered, while there is a managerial viewpoint, it's clear that using AI is beneficial for everyone involved, the actual users, dev leads, experienced developers, and junior developers alike. That's why almost every country is adopting AI coding tools.
I've seen reports in Korea that a startup, one that's very popular among developers, will now permit the use of AI coding tools in their hiring tests. I also heard that another company recently allowed it when recruiting experienced hires. Seeing these developments, it seems the perception is changing, because coding with AI used to be somewhat stigmatized or frowned upon.
Right, it felt a bit like cheating.
The atmosphere seems to be changing so much, so I was curious about the actual situation.
I see that as a very significant change. For example, it's like the debate over allowing calculators in a math exam. For students learning basic addition and multiplication, allowing a calculator defeats the purpose of the test. However, if you need to perform more complex calculations that involve arithmetic, using a calculator is fine. University students use scientific calculators during exams all the time. No one thinks that's wrong. In fact, someone who knows how to use it well should be seen as having an advantage. That's why I believe that in developer tests, it's right to ask, why did you use this specific prompt? For example, if the task is to build a program, the evaluation shouldn't just be a checklist of the final output. The point is, I think we can now shift to a model where we ask, why did you prompt the AI in this specific way for this problem? And how do you assess the outcome?
So the evaluation criteria for tests are also changing.
Even when asking someone to write code, you don't just check if it runs. You should ask, why did you ask the question this way? And how do you judge the output? Their explanation will reveal everything. In the past, the pointless method was to say, type this out so we can see if you know it. But honestly, that's something anyone can do just by cramming and memorizing. To give a clear example, this creates a pitfall where you're forced to pass someone who has no real understanding, but who simply regurgitated the answer from memory. In that respect, it's more rational now to provide AI tools during developer tests, give more complex assignments, and then ask about the prompts they used and their assessment of the results.
So, just as the evaluation criteria would change if AI coding is introduced into the hiring process, it follows that the KPIs for those already working in the industry would also have to change, wouldn't they?
They will change. Assuming AI is used, the direction will be much more specific, like use AI to code that part, then connect it here, pull this data, and produce the output like this. I actually see this as part of the process of shortening timelines.
Shortening the overall work process time.
In the past, work had to be assigned fragmentally. Do this. Okay, I'm done. Great, now do this. Now, with the assumption that the basics can be handled by AI, it's possible for work to shift to a model where instructions are given holistically, allowing for a greater focus on the final outcome.
In that case, for companies that are adopting AI coding, what preparations are big tech firms making for this transition?
Companies that already have well-established automation pipelines will reap enormous benefits. But if a company was practicing DevOps in name only, with everything done manually, no automation, manual unit tests, manual builds, then there's very little room for AI to intervene.
It would just get stuck.
Exactly, it gets stuck. As I said, giving a command via vibe coding like build this, run unit tests, show me the results, and if there are no issues, package it and check it into the repository is simple. It can be done. But what if the AI responds, the repository isn't connected, or there is no issue tracking system? In that situation, where is the AI supposed to do its work? What's unfortunate right now is that when people hear, wow, AI can code, they only focus on the code generation aspect. They only talk about which LLM generates better code or which tool is superior, but, as we all know, over time, the capabilities of these LLMs will plateau and become standardized. The choice of LLM will become a matter of selecting the right tool for the situation. It's not the most critical issue. The truly important questions are, how do we handle testing? How is design connected to development? What is our deployment process? If these are all disconnected, it's extremely difficult to reap the benefits. Ultimately, if you don't have that platform aspect established, covering your source repository, testing, issue tracking, and so on, it doesn't matter if it's AI or something else. You'll continue to have tasks that rely on human intervention, and your processes will not improve.
When I asked what to prepare for adoption, I was actually thinking about things like measuring KPIs or evaluation methods. But it seems this foundational work must be completed first for proper adoption to even be possible.
Many companies have already been preparing for this. In fact, if you look back, these are the same kinds of topics that were discussed frequently during the digital transformation and the AI transformation waves. However, at that time, most companies were heavily focused on data, because data is a critical asset. However, areas like the development process and testing were somewhat neglected. Large corporations did automate these things, but in environments with high dependency on system integrators, SI, like here in Korea, development and operations were handled by different entities, leading to a disconnected process. Because you could just outsource it. But now if you need to fix problems internally and accelerate this process, you need a fully integrated view of the entire development life cycle. If a company doesn't have that foundation in place, they're likely to view AI as nothing more than a simple code generation tool.
It's not much different from just working at the level of a toy project, is it?
It would be a little better than that, I'll grant you, but for us, on the other hand, we don't even handle server creation. I just tell it to build the server, and it takes care of everything up to deployment.
You, on the other hand, just write the code. Then you have to compile it yourself. You have to do the testing yourself, right? Isn't that all manual labor for us? The AI does it all.
While another company is racing ahead because all they need is a quick tire change, over here, even if you change the tires, the engine isn't even connected.
You fitted the wheel perfectly, but it's a train with no tracks. We need a train, so you buy a steam locomotive.
But then you're told you have to lay the tracks.
What? Meanwhile, others already have their tracks laid. All they have to do is run on them. The truth is, a company's perspective on AI and the level of benefit it can derive from it will differ dramatically depending on that foundational preparation and background. Right now, the conversation tends to be superficial, limited to things like, this tool is good or that one is good. And while preferences and things like that will naturally arise and can of course be important to a degree, but what's more important is that AI is going to be integrated across the entire development lifecycle. An era is coming where we'll have what you could truly call agentic DevOps or an agentic development process, where everything is accomplished with the help of agents. For example, imagine you have a build agent, a coding agent, a deployment agent, and a monitoring agent. You can just connect these agents, create a multi-agent system, and tell them, all right, you all work together now. You can connect something like MCP. It's not technically impossible. However, to make that happen, all the foundational work needs to be in place. If it's not, you'll only be able to use fragmented piecemeal functions.